really have to realize there's three realms: before, during, and after. If you have beneficiaries, you want to understand basic concepts like, what are my net assets? We can do that right now. But when you look into the future, there are going to be new developments. Not waiting until it's everybody's opinion of the past that they're arguing about. That's when the expensive problems kick in.
So how do you guide people through that conversation? Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My guest today, William Ovca. Now, William, we met on the community School. For those that don't know, School is a social media community of like-minded people, business people. But we started talking because this topic of death and dying, as an accountant, a CPA, for you've seen it firsthand on the impacts that it has to people. So listen, welcome to the show. And what brought you here today?
Thank you very much, Nikki. In large part, you brought me here because I was on one of your webinars. I learned for the first time that this wonderful device that I've been carrying around for 10 or 15 years has a legacy contact on it. And I told my significant other about that, and we all felt like a big step forward was taken in our digital life planning, which is always very challenging. And you helped me realize that, remind me of that old phrase, the shoemaker's kids frequently go barefoot. I've known about wills, I've known about last intentions, but only recently am I hearing a growing number of stories where, for a variety of reasons, a family ends up with a lot of professional fees on their hands, and rivalry between the beneficiaries because there wasn't clarity in the last wishes of the elderly family member that oftentimes everybody loves, but when they're gone, a lot of times disputes happen if there's a lack of clarity.
So as an accountant, do you usually see people before they're planning, during their planning, or after the person's actually gone?
Well, that's a good question. 10 years ago, I would say 90% of my work and most accountants was after the fact. And more, it's becoming obvious, whether it's financial planning, end of life planning, or tax planning, the best results are achieved early, before the fact.
I mean, failure to plan is a plan to fail. I mean, that's the old statement, right? Another one we use in project management is your lack of foresight doesn't institute an emergency on my part. But here we are, both of us, we're passionate about this topic. And we also are trying to encourage people like not to be afraid to have these conversations, because as an accountant, it can become quite costly when people don't plan ahead.
That's very true. And you have to keep in mind, like taxes, there's oftentimes some dates that kick in when a person passes away, their estate is formed, and unless somebody's in the family as an accountant or a tax preparer, that's a separate tax return, that's a separate bank account, and it's also a year or more of gathering information to make sure that there are no creditors, and all of that, as we know, as many people know, is a probate process, which can be very straightforward and quick if plans are set in place where there are designated beneficiaries and an understanding among all family members what the last will is and what the intentions are. It can take years off of a very expensive process.
When we're working with building a final playbook, right? So looking at the legal, financial, physical, digital, this this financial piece, people don't realize that part of their estate plan or part of their, let's call their final playbook, their end of life planning, really does need to explore the tax implications. So for some people, and you might, let's do a 101 on what a trust is and the different, how a trust can either avoid or minimize some of the tax responsibilities that people are looking when they're designing their estate plan. So how do you guide people through that conversation?
My first recommendation would be start the conversation early. And there's always the make versus buy decision. There's a lot of resources on the web if you want to learn what a trust is, what a living trust is, and what grantor trusts are, what charitable trusts are. You can save a lot of money in professional fees, but um, it's always good to have a lawyer involved in the final stages. But knowing what assets exist and what the cash flow requirements are going to be as people get to the end of their life really reduces the cost of meeting those cash flow requirements and preserves the capital that, with a long-term view, can be used very effectively throughout retirement to meet the needs and stay invested.
It's just so hard to have these conversations, these financial conversations. For some people, they just think, oh, I've got a will. So when I die, it'll all just go to my beneficiaries. But they don't realize, like, after the person dies, that there's going to be a process of probate. And when there's probate, there's usually tax implications. And I think for some people, especially some of these executors, they don't understand that responsibility. They think, oh, I'm just going to get a large check written to me and I'm good to go, right? I had to explain to them that it's not really
And,
that simple.
and you have to consider the different types of assets that are involved, because you mentioned when people think of tax implications of an estate, they they know that there's a $14 million lifetime exclusion that you don't have to pay estate taxes, but that doesn't mean that there's not individual income taxes that are involved in things like a partnership, an ownership interest in a partnership. If a partner dies, that's that event is covered by a partnership agreement, and it could have very specific or significant requirements that on the buyout of the partnership interest, there could be a gain or a loss that people aren't really figuring into the equation. But when it's important for people to realize that while we're alive, if we have investments and there are unrealized gains or losses, that it's easy for those to not, they don't show up in a bank account somewhere, and having a clear understanding of what all the assets are, and if there are any non-public assets like a partnership interest or any kind of corporate ownership interest that's non-public, those all have valuation questions. They have shareholder agreement requirements that may change if the person who owns the interest passes away, and their interest goes into a an estate, and then the estate has to negotiate with the private company how to value the ownership interest, and sometimes that's not really clear in the operating agreements. All of these are questions that, if you have a discussion with the family member while they're still lucid and while they still very logically and rationally want to avoid extra professional fees on lawyers and accountants when dividing their assets among their beneficiaries. They don't want to include the professionals as another one of their beneficiaries. So, but as time goes on, you hear a growing number of families where the widow or widower is getting older, and maybe there's some memory issues and maybe there's some health issues, and the kids are getting a little more um single-minded about what their view of what they're entitled to is, and the mother's kind of caught in the middle and she loves both of her children. I mean, we've all seen
Family
that. And
dynamics.
the elderly parent is usually decreasingly interested in resolving this as time goes on. And somebody took it over because they were the oldest, and then somebody else kind of worked really hard at it but got pushed out. So is there interest, like, well, you could have stayed but you didn't? Is it 50-50? That could create some confusion later on.
Or even in family, the dynamics where one child might be the actual caregiver of the parent. Statistically, it's usually the daughter. Many times it's the older daughter, but sometimes the parents will depend on one child for caregiving, but another child to make those executorship decisions or power of attorney decisions. And then that creates conflict within the family from a financial standpoint as well. I mean, the dynamics can be really volatile within a family if it's not well structured, documented, and discussed. Have you had any stories where you've had clients that you wish they had talked to you sooner than later?
I've had clients, I've had family situations, and Nikki, once again, you're reminding me of, we really have to realize there's three realms: before, during, and after. And there's all the things the plans we could have been laying for 5 years and leading up to this, and then we realize, like, maybe we've done none of that. We can do that right now. We can't, like, save ourselves a relaxed pace over the last 5 years, but when you look into the future, there are going to be new developments. There's going to be new family members. Things are going to change. Wills are not set it and forget it, but having a conversation among the family members and not waiting until it's everybody's opinion of the past that they're arguing about, like, well, dad said I was, going to be the sole owner, or maybe the other child says maybe it was 50-50. But not having clarity on that is understandable, but having no conversation about it for months and years and decades, that's when the expensive problems kick in. And I really liked your slide in the last presentation about Aretha Franklin's estate. Like, started at 80 million, and what did they end up splitting? Six?
Less than six after 5 years of probate because she died in intestate. And people just don't realize the importance of those conversations. And to also to engage, I think it's important to start engaging with service professionals like yourself, an accountant, early on. So let's talk a little bit about what an accountant would do for estate, for end of life planning, because there's multiple scenarios, phases versus, say, an estate attorney. So the reason I'm saying is, right? So in the My Final Playbook, we talk about three scenarios. You die tomorrow, right? Unexpected, or you get that terminal diagnosis. But more specifically, I would think your role would come in for that long-term care plan, right? Making sure that as a financial advisor and accountant, that your clients are well protected and planned out if they need that long-term care. So my question is, the difference between talking to an accountant versus talking to a state attorney during the planning process.
Well, obviously very different skill sets. If I had to choose, I'm biased. I would go with the accountant because I think that a lot of the estate planning concepts are pretty easy to grasp. It has to do with ownership, it has to do with control, and it has to do with taxability.
Here's another question that I get often is that when I talk to people, hey, do you have, a end of life plan? And their response to me is, oh, I don't have much, or I don't have anything. I don't own a house. I don't have, thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in a bank account. What would you say to that comment when people say that?
If you have beneficiaries, you want to understand basic concepts like, what are my net assets, and be able to list them out. Just, they don't have to be to the penny, but these are my bank accounts, these are my things that are worth money that isn't money in the bank, like my house, or if I have ownership interests in some kind of non-public entity, or if I have investment accounts, and put that all together on a balance sheet, just like you would if you were a business. You have assets, you have liabilities, and the difference is your net worth. Understanding that concept before you go to the estate planning process, I think, is a great jumping off point for the legal part of it. Like, I have these net assets, some of them are in cash, some of them are not in cash. What do I want to happen with those when I get to my last will and testament? And do I need to do anything else if I want to, say, leave a part of my net assets to my grandchildren? Is that better done through a trust?
But what if people don't have any assets or very little, just a few $100 or $1,000? Is it their feeling is, well, it's not even worth for me to go through even just to do a simple will. Your advice?
Quantitatively, that, if you don't have any assets, you can say, well, I don't have anything to distribute. But there are also Social Security gives you about $200 in a death benefit. I don't know if that would pay for the first trip to the funeral
I don't
home,
think so.
but it's insufficient, and we have to realize that we have liabilities, and we have also potential unrealized losses associated with if the beneficiaries have a difference of opinion about, I don't have any assets, but maybe I have a house, or maybe I have some possessions that they're fighting over. That can turn into legal expenses if your beneficiaries do not have clarity about what your last wishes are and have committed to say, I support that. I will not give my other beneficiary a hard time because I understand while you are of sound mind and body that this is what you want, so I will respect that. There's a real big benefit in reaching that consensus with all family members through conversation, even if there's no, dollar signs to be added up.
I know you've created a checklist for caregivers of elderly and disabled family members. And I actually have a heartbreaking story of a friend of the family where the these are people well into their 60s. Um, the brother dies. He died unexpectedly. He was 65. And this brother was actually financially supporting two of his siblings. The distribution of his assets would have disqualified, or now there's a problem, right? The distribution of the brother's assets to the siblings now is going to disqualify some of the siblings from receiving government support. And this is a huge consideration when people are planning out their estates. Is this something that that you have encountered before? And what do you advise?
I'm pretty confident that the right um, estate attorneys would be able to amend the trust documents or the estate, go to the executor and say, make a case that in substance, the decedent wanted to maximize the benefit to the beneficiaries, not take away their Social Security. There's clearly ways to do that, but once again,
Do ahead of
after
time.
the fact, you need leave of court to do so, and it's subject to challenge by the other family members, maybe that would get a bigger share of the estate under different circumstances, or uses that as a bargaining chip. All of these being arguments for start the conversation early. And the big hurdle there that I see in my own family and with clients that I know that have, elderly parents and are doing an increasing amount of their family office work, um, really all types of support. having this conversation early before the person gets to be challenged by health issues and other predictable aspects of old age is a game
So
changer.
how early is too early, right? That I get that all the time. I get that, "Oh, I'm 40. I don't need to be thinking about this already." So what is your professional advice? When should people start having this conversation? What is that age?
Well, I guess no time like the present as far as getting over the discomfort of we all die and we don't want to say goodbye to our family members, and we most of us have situations. I was 20 years old when my dad passed away, and I know you have some very compelling stories from when you were growing up. I think we realize when we lose a family member at an early age that there's a lot of hidden implications to that that take many years to manifest. Once that happens to you, it's very easy to take something like end of life planning and realize, like, boy, there is no question in my mind. I want to do this and I want to spread the good word that everybody in my family just tell your story. Just talk about it. Everybody else is uncomfortable with it, you can tell them to take your time, but take uh this is putting the horse before the cart. And we all know that we're going to get to a point where our brains aren't working as well as they used to. My mom reminds me of that every day when I talk to her. And we get more tired than we used to. And don't save it till, that part of your life when you're even more exhausted than you are back in the earned income days. And, it's a good opportunity to spend time with family and get used to something that, takes some getting used to.
Or just take it on like and just de-emotionalize it, just to be say like, "Hey, this is just like you doing your yearly taxes is just part of that next level of adulting," is what I say. So let me ask you this question, William. Out of all the states, I mean, we're focused on the US, Canada. When you hear that there's an estate, which out of the 50 states, which one do you feel like is the most challenging when it comes to either inheritance tax or estate tax?
I have to admit, I've had very little I'm just starting to get some estate tax returns. They've been in New York and Illinois. They're both, I think, very, the state probate process is very different than the tax process is very much an after the fact, almost an afterthought there, that whatever happens in terms of the legal procedure about when the distributions get approved and who they are to, if there's disputes, that all gets resolved in court and the tax return reflects who got what. And so it's a pretty straightforward process, even more so at the federal level than the state level. They're just more expensive.
Well, I know I'm in the state of Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is like one of 5 states that not just has an estate tax, but it also has an inheritance tax, right? So people need to understand that, right? There are 2 taxes, at least in my state, that we are hit with when it comes to estate tax, right? So there's the estate tax, which is at the federal level, and then there's an inheritance tax. So which states are involved with that?
Well, and I've got some friends in a little bit west of Philadelphia there, and I there's something about Pennsylvania. They come up with things, taxable things that I've never seen before, and um, Illinois, it's basically no tax on inheritance less than, I think it's $3 million.
Right. So there's a
So
threshold.
so the notion that there would be two taxes below like a very big amount of money, well, we know the federal government's getting smaller, so the states do what they have to do.
Oh, and with that, thank you so much. I appreciate your expertise. And, do you have a couple of takeaways people can do right away that to encourage them to
The
protect
biggest
themselves?
one, Nikki, and I have to thank you for this. I mean, there's a lot of lot of things going on in the world, and a great data point for me is Elon Musk was worth only $20 billion in 2020. He is now, well on his way to $2 trillion if all his pay packages get approved. And he has paid tax on exactly like a millionth of a percent of that because it's all unrealized appreciation. Look at the power of that at the top end of the food chain and start the conversation early with your family members. It is going to save you priceless amounts of um, inheritance and net assets that you don't want to be sending to accountants and lawyers because there was a lack of clarity. Start the conversation early, and you know, there's a case to be made. Nobody really wants to spend a lot of time in law books and doing financial forecasts, but getting a basic idea of your net assets, your cash flow as the end of life unfolds. You probably have to sell a house. Maybe there's a gain. Maybe there's assisted living. Maybe there's in-home care. They all have numbers associated with them, and everybody knows how to use a spreadsheet, just not a lot of people want to. And if your accountant's worth their salt, they'll realize that there's a lot of these non-historical things that they can help you with and get your family affairs in order. Um, if your accountant doesn't offer those services, look around. And one thing, there's a growing number of sites like Trust and Will. Really keep educated, use AI, and keep the conversation going with your family members.
And if you haven't had them, it's time to start, right? Just step by step, just ask them. Even something as with no emotion to it, like, hey, your phone, do you have your legacy contact set up on your phone? Just start there. And then from that conversation, it's like, okay, well, if something were to happen to you, who do you want to be managing your affairs, whether you're incapacitated or gone tomorrow? And I think that it's a good start because then it starts opening up those conversations of what your true wishes are and then start to plan and pulling in. Don't be afraid to pull in the accountants, right? What's that
Mhm.
tax implication going to be at end of life? You certainly don't want to be stuck with a tax bill at the end when you've just lost someone dear to you most. And with that, where can people find you, William, if they want to engage and learn more about your services?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm working on a site called Eld Office, ELDOFFICE, and the concept is like only the rich people up till now had family office services. A lot of the nuts and bolts of what you talk about with your end of life playbook need some support in the way of worksheets and documents and intentions being committed to writing. And this is going to be a site that helps people identify what those are and how to, either get the right professionals to help with them or do it yourself.
That's awesome. And with that, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll end here. Appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.